Hello, everyone, and welcome to another historian's interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And my guest today is a first timer here on the channel, and this will be her second appearance on a podcast. Now, my guest today is a young historian and writer with a passion for exploring the intersections of language, culture, and history. Having graduated from the University of Nottingham with a degree in Russian language and history, my guest has developed a deep understanding of the Rus, the early Christian church, the Orthodox Church, Nordic, Slavic, and Greek paganism, alongside delving into the caveats of hagiographical texts. Currently, she is engaged with Saint Olga of Kiev, the first regent queen of the Rus, writing a book that aims to shed new light on her life and legacy, offering a re-examination of Olga that aims to recenter her in the history of the Rus and drawing attention to the Rus as a part of medieval history more generally. Outside of her dedicated research surrounding St. Olga of Kiev, she has worked in close association with a fellow guest that has been on the show, a Mr. Jackson Van Nuden with History of Jackson, writing articles and book reviews, directing social media and event coordination during History with Jackson's coverage of history festivals throughout England. And you can find her at the Chalk History Festival this upcoming June. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to a fellow historian and first timer here on the channel, Abigail Rebecca. Abigail, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to finally get down and talk with you. It feels like it's been a long time coming.
It has. So, before we dive into your interview, is there anything else you'd like to add about your background, projects, anything we should expect in the future?
Apart from what you've just said, I'm currently working on my book, which is about Saint Olga of Kiev, and that will be like I don't know when it's coming out, but it should be written by the end of this year, which is exciting. And yeah, just I will be with History with Jackson, as you said, Jackson Van Uden, who's previously been on your podcast at Chalk Valley History Festival. So if you've got any listeners who are in the UK and are planning on coming to the festival, it would be great to see them.
Awesome. So, now let's dive on into the beginning. So, Abigail, when did you decide that history was something that you wanted to pursue? Walk us through the journey. What was the aha moment in your life growing up?
So it's actually it's a really funny story because me and
Ooh, okay.
we like as we've kind of discussed, I'm a very good friend of Jackson, who we just said has been on your podcast before,
Mm-hmm.
and grew up together. I've known him since we were like 4 or 5. We grew up down the street from one another, and we were always very close history nerds with each other. We were in competition who could name the most kings and queens, or I don't know, just one up each other in class. We've always been quite competitive, and I think we both had that kind of like passion for history. And then we disconnected over our like adolescent years, teenage years, as one does. We didn't went to different schools. He was abroad for a bit, and then we reconnected at uni actually because of our love of history. It was
All
one of those
right.
like, oh, what are you studying in history? What am I studying in history? So I think some of my fondest memories with history have come from like that early kind of formative time with me and Jackson being friends who both liked the same things. There weren't many other people in my year or my sort of close social circle who liked history. I kind of felt like a little bit of a nerd reading like history books and kind of deep diving into like Romanov history. I was a really big um supporter of can we find the lost princess Anastasia, like is she out there still? But obviously we now know she wasn't. It was actually her older sister who we didn't have the bones for. But it's that's kind of how I've got into history. And then again, when I decided to study Russian language and history at university, it was very much a what I don't know what I want to do with my future. I really, really enjoy history and I want to study something that I'm passionate about. I don't want to spend all this time and dedication on something that I don't enjoy and I don't see myself being able to fully commit to. And because otherwise it'd be just doing something for the sake of doing something, right? And I don't
Right.
want to do that. So then I was looking at, oh, well, I really like Russian history. I love Romanov history. I think that's very interesting. Can I pick up a language? Can I diversify my skill set? Is there something here that I can really kind of add value to myself as an individual, but also for employability purposes? Essentially, we're
Right.
all looking at how we can make money, um,
Yes.
especially in this global economy. But yeah, no, so it really was okay. I like Russian history. I know I like Russian history. I've studied it at A levels, which is our kind of senior education examinations here in the UK. And I was like, oh, if I can pick up Russian, maybe I'll be able to translate sources and have like a better understanding of the culture and the context about the history I want to
Right.
study. And then it was through the Slavonic department at like my university. I had some incredible lecturers, tutors, professors. They've really instilled a love for history within me in different periods that I would never have even begun to study, like the former kingdom of Yugoslavia and the Rus, which is now
Right.
what my book is about. Like, so I think the aha moment was at university as a, okay, I could do this as a career. This is something that I really enjoy. But I think the fundamental love for history has come throughout my life, but definitely from childhood. Yeah.
Awesome. And that's really good. You had that sort of journey growing up and still learning about history, which honestly, the fields that I read from your bio is very interesting because I don't think a lot of people, at least in the mainstream history, really look into the Rus, the Nordic, Slavic. Well, maybe the Nordic because of the Vikings who have been immortalized in pop culture and films. But Slavic, the Rus especially, are very, very intriguing. And for people who don't know who the Rus are, at least from my research and understanding, that the Rus are kind of like the ancestors of what are now the Russian people and those of Eastern Europe. Is that correct, Abigail, or am I completely wrong?
So there is, so the Rus is started as a Scandinavian settlement of Varangians, which is the kind of the Eastern Vikings of the world. So we have Vikings in the West, in Britain, in France, etc., and then we have the Varangians who came down from Scandinavia down to the markets of the Byzantine Empire and the
Mm-hmm.
Abbasid. So they kind of settled in what is the steppe, so kind of Hungary area, and now what is Ukraine. So the Rus are the common ancestors of quite a few East Slavic countries, but predominantly today Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. And I think there's been in history generally, there's been a lot of conflation of the Rus being Russia, which kind of diminishes the shared history with Ukraine and Belarus as well. But so it's important to acknowledge that it's not just Russia that the Rus are ancestors of. There is a big shared history there.
Fascinating. And that kind of leads into the beginning questions, Abigail. So in university or towards the end of university when you were nearing graduation and you were nearing, what you want to do with your field in terms of employment, did you think of, what was the near desire you want to satisfy the historical community and as well as the promise you are making to the field of history? Because a lot of historians who've answered this question usually don't really have like a definitive answer. It's more of like my promise is to be accurate in history, to tell the truth, to present history the best way I can. And I'm wondering if that's almost the same for you.
I guess like 100%. I never want to misappropriate any facts, or I don't want to say anything as a historical truth that isn't the case. But I think so towards the end of my degree, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I yeah, genuinely, truly no idea what I wanted to do. And it's only over the course. So I was writing for the Historians magazine, um, and a, a publishing company, Pen and Sword Books, had read one of my articles, and they reached out to me and was like, "Hey, can we collaborate? Can you write something for us about women's history, potentially in Russian history?" And that's how we kind of negotiated and came to the idea of me writing about St. Olga of Kiev of the Rus, um, because she's been someone that I'd kind of studied at university but hadn't really deep dived into. And I'd
Okay.
say I kind of had that the moment that you were saying about like my promise to history has kind of come along the process of writing this book as I've been
Hmm.
uncovering Olga, because I think history, there is only so much you can really say about history, because history is kind of, it's happened, it's in the past. But I do think historians, we have a really big duty of care to understand that our perception of history completely changes the way that future generations will think about history, read history, write about history. And I think that's happened with Olga. She's a really, really fascinating woman of history who's kind of been glossed over in the grand histories of men, and
Right.
also Russian centrism, but also Christian centrism. So we've kind of got a lot of these biases that have been put onto her. So I think my promise to the, I guess, the academic community or the history community, or I guess just history lovers in general, is I would like to re examine Olga from a lens that rewrites her in her own importance and not important because of other factors or because she's just a footnote in men's history. I kind of want to give her, recenter her in her own life. Whether I do that or not is completely up to the reader, because again, history is very subjective. We've seen that from, you know, the old adage of victors write history.
Right.
So I can do my best. I can't promise, I guess, anything, but I will try my best.
And that's all, any of us could do. So let's actually talk a little bit about your book that you're writing. So when you got in contact with, or say when Pen and Sword got in contact with you and you guys discussed the book, what was sort of the initial feedback from like friends, family who heard about, this huge opportunity? Like, what was the response like?
Did you say from my friends and family?
Yes, friends and family when they learned that you're going to be writing a book with Pen and Sword.
So I kind of kept it quiet to begin with. I'm not someone who
Oh,
likes
okay.
to say things before they're completely concrete. I don't want to jinx myself, I guess. But the first person I told was Jackson. I kind of, when I got the DM, because it was on Instagram that Pen and Sword reached out to me, um, I basically sent this I screenshot it and sent it to Jackson, being like, "Is this real? Has this is this what this is this what they're asking of me? Are they really asking, they would like me to write for them?" I couldn't believe it. I was flabbergasted. And I went to Jackson, who is kind of like, who I see as an authority figure for me in the history community. He's very well connected, and he's
Mm,
definitely somebody who garners a lot of respect in the community. So for me, not really being in the history community, kind of just being a passive history lover, I was like, oh,
right.
is this a legitimate thing? Delved into what the intricacies of that would be and kind of negotiated what I'd be writing my book about. There was a couple of different prospects thrown about before I settled on St. Olga. Um, and by that time, it was the like summer holidays, and I was actually on holiday with my family, and we had gone down to the south of England, and it was beautiful. And I kind of got this email, and I remember kind of having a little like fangirl moment in the car, like to my mum, was going like, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, this is happening. They want me to write a book." And my mum was like, "I'm sorry, who wants you to write a book?" And I was like, "This publishing company called Pen and Sword, they da da da." And yeah, and then I think I didn't tell anyone else until I'd signed my contract, just because again I didn't want to jinx it. Didn't want to,
Right.
I didn't want to boast about something that hadn't happened yet. And I think I've only got quite comfortable talking about the fact that I'm writing about a book fairly recently, potentially in the last 6 months, I'd say. And that's because, it's getting closer to deadline day and I'm suddenly going to have a book on my hands and, can't have hidden that any longer.
Awesome. That's incredible. And for listeners who don't know who Pen and Sword are, I've had a few guests on the show who wrote books for them, who have collaborated with them. Pen and Sword is probably one of the most respected and premier publishing houses that specializes in historical nonfiction and reference books. I mean, they are the top of their game. They are, I would dare say, in the elite class of historical publication. So that is huge, Abigail, that you have this incredible opportunity to write. And I would imagine the sense that that kind of sense validates in a way you as an historian in like your field that you are researching about, that a company believes that you have what it takes to write about something that you are very passionate about. Because it's one thing to write about something for a company or publishing house, which is still incredible. It's another thing when you have the opportunity to write about a period in history that you have the authority on, that you have researched on, continuously researching. That I can imagine is incredible, because that I would imagine is like, wow, I think I'm on like my way.
It's a little bit overwhelming, if to tell you the truth, because there isn't actually a lot of books about Saint Olga of Kiev specifically.
Hmm.
I'm having to do a lot of um, connecting the dots, finding little bits from here and there. So I think the thing that really got me was, oh my gosh, this could be the first book of its kind about Olga. So people might be referencing my work. That's a big thing for me. That was truly the moment where I was like, okay, this is a really big deal. And yeah, I'm so grateful to Pen and Sword to have thought, this girl's got something to her. We want her to write for us, and B, for giving me the platform to write about Saint Olga, because the more I get into the research and how passionate I am about her, the more I'm like, it would be a great injustice for people not to know about her, and for people to not know her story and the impact and on culture, but also national sentiment across Eastern Europe, but also just how important she was to the formation of the Rus. Like, she's
Right.
incredibly impactful, and we don't know anything about her. So, I'm really excited, but also it's quite overwhelming. There's a lot of pressure there.
Definitely. And that actually kind of leads into the next question, which is a little bit serious. And it's actually one of a few serious questions which I have throughout the interview, which is, I'm sure as you definitely know, Abigail, like being an author, being a historian, there is that sense of imposter syndrome that everyone feels in their daily life, in any industry, in any field. Because I'm sure you would definitely know, as being a historian, you work on research, you work on projects, you put it out there on the digital stage, seeing if someone would be interested to learn more about, or to reach out and say, we would like you to work with us on this thing. Or if you're an author, which I've experienced myself, putting it out there, hoping to see if someone would give you opportunity to like, hey, we like your book, we want to publish your book under us. And no response, or getting deflated, and again that voice saying that you shouldn't be here, you don't belong here. And that I think is especially true for authors and historians. And I've had a lot of people said that it's a struggle. It's a struggle, especially for an historian, because if you're not going into, let's say, like a government historian, or working in the museums, or being part of a large organization that specializes in preservation of history, or as a touring history group, your options are
Yeah.
very limited. So, for you, have you ever had that sense of imposter syndrome? And if not, what has continued to discipline you to pursue history, to write about history, to study and teach history? Because this is the place where you belong. This is the field that you belong to.
I definitely experience imposter syndrome. I continue to experience it every time I come on here. I didn't even feel comfortable calling myself a historian, and probably until 2 months ago. And that's because it doesn't feel like I am a historian. I don't know whether I think as a historian, as someone who is really old and wise and spends all their time in the library writing these great histories and having such deep and profound things to say. And I feel like I don't know whether I'm qualified enough to be a historian. I feel like I do think I constantly feel as if I am not taken seriously, or I don't take myself seriously as a historian, when actually I do have a lot to say and a lot to add to the conversation. And I think the one reason why I'm being a lot more confident and comfortable in my abilities as a historian, and to say no, I am a historian, I am a young historian, yes, but I am a historian nonetheless, is because of my best friend Jackson. He is so incredibly supportive of me as an individual, but also as a historian. He has believed in me from day dot. He has believed in who I am and my ability to write good history. Um, and he will say, "Oh, you don't need your ego boosted anymore. Like, you know, you're good at this." But the fact that he continually builds me up, lifts me up, supports me, makes me feel validated as a historian. It makes me feel validated as someone who is good at history, is good at writing, can write something that makes sense. So I'm really grateful for his continued support, because I genuinely do not think that without him being that supportive of me and my ability to be a historian, I wouldn't be on this podcast. I wouldn't be talking about Olga. I would probably have continued to write my book in isolation, publish it, tell no one that it was published, and then, you know, if someone stumbled across it, oh yeah, I'll tell them that it was me who wrote it. But I wouldn't have advertised that fact. So, and that would have been because of imposter syndrome. It would have been of constantly that fear of not being adequate enough. Um, my tutors at university seeing it and thinking, oh, that was a load of crap. Why did they write that? Um,
Right.
I don't know, but I definitely think my confidence, my ability to be confident in myself comes from my support system around me. And to those people, Jackson being one of them, and all the people that I consider family, they know who they are. They truly have continued to support me and build me up, and I am forever grateful for them.
That is absolutely very sweet. And you're absolutely right in everything you say. And just also to add to that, something that a guest of mine said previously, I guess it also stems from your long term goals, whatever field. And this was an author interview, but I think it still applies to this, which is, do you want to be an author or do you want to be known as an author? Because those are very two different things. And I
They are.
guess if you look at it from a historian's perspective, that also applies. Do you want to be an historian or do you want to be known as an historian? Because if you want to be known as an historian, that's a different mindset where you have to go out there, you have to really show everyone who you are. Whereas, in his opinion, being a historian is like pursuing history, researching, documenting it, and in his words, not really going for the commercial side, like trying to be a part of like shows or podcasts or anything, but just studying history and just presenting history. Or in case if you're an author, just writing to write because you're passionate about it. And if someone picks up your book, oh, that's great. I wasn't trying to write for like an audience in mind. I'm just trying to write for me. Same thing for like an historian. Like you are learning about history for yourself. You're not so much as learning history to teach to others, but that can be different depending on the person and what their overall goals are. And that's true for everyone. How you pursue history and what you want to do with history is in it's like tangible. You can do whatever you want with it. Which then I think leads into a little fun little transition before we get into the business side, which is of course social media. So Abigail, when did you decide to get on the social media platform and decide to discuss and talk about history? Because I've been seeing a lot of that on Instagram. Probably the two big things I've seen on my feed. It's either bookstagrammers, people who review books and talk about books and promote other people's books, and history people, people that travel who talk about ancient places, or if it's castles, medieval life, and so forth, and even archaeology too. So, how did that come about, Abigail? And were you nervous?
So I, I just want to say really quickly about what you just said about wanting to be an author, to be known for an author, or being an author because you want to write. Same for history. I've never looked at it that way. That's completely changed my perspective because actually no, because no, truly, like they are two completely separate things, and I had never kind of considered them to be two separate things. I kind of figured them to be part and parcel. But I definitely would say that I would like to just be a historian for the sake of being a historian. I don't want to be a historian for the public facing, which leads to this question about social media. I have always been on social media. I definitely grew up with social media, and I think our generation of people, we have grown up with social media, so it's
Hmm.
definitely something that is just part of our lives. So it me feel a bit scared about starting a history account for my book, because I already have a travel account, because I post photos from where I travel, and I didn't want to clog up my main feed with hundreds of photos and videos of churches, because I like to take photos of churches. It fits in with being a religious historian, but there's that. And my main account, which I keep on private. So it didn't make me feel scared to start a history account. It made me start feel scared to start posting on the account, because I
Mm.
that kind of imposter syndrome kicking in of like, who wants to even see my content? Who wants to hear about this book that I'm writing about? But I think the only reason I actually did it was because I was at the beginning of this year, I had started to get involved more deeply with History of Jackson and attending history festivals with him in support of his podcast and blog. And we went to the Catherine of Aragon Festival, and I was kind of like helping support him with his social media. So helping him direct videos, film videos, kind of get the content out so he could focus on networking and,
Right.
making doing all the things he needed to do from the podcast side of things, which he wouldn't have had time to do in a really quite stressful 3 days of the Catherine of Aragon Festival at Peterborough Cathedral. So I kind of like took over that side of to take the weight off his shoulders a little bit, and I realized that I do really like social media. I like promoting history. I'm never going to be a Jackson though, going out and talking about historical sites. I don't really want to be public facing in that way, but I do see the value in social media as a way to keep myself accountable, as a way to kind of keep people in my life updated where I am with my book. But also people who kind of just want to follow along for the journey. There's quite a few people who have followed me recently, um, after I like started talking about where I was at with the book and like things that I was kind of finding interesting or difficult. So it's a nice way to build a community of other history lovers without having to put myself out there as an authority of history in general, because I'm very specialized in what I know. um, I'm not a public historian in the way that a lot of people on social media are, who are talking about going traveling and like these beautiful castles and displaying
Right.
it for public consumption. So I think, yeah, and I think what really made it such a profound thing that you just said about the author for public or historian for public, history for yourself, is I think because I'm using social media but not for public history. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Like you are posting about history on the public digital stage, but you're not actively trying to be in the public eye. You're just it's almost like someone who's how do I say it to like make the connotation where you're posting it, you're telling people about like your journey, almost like, oh, this is where I'm gonna be doing, like this is what I'm doing. Like almost like a I don't want to say a scrapbook because it's entirely different, but I get what you're saying. Now I'm
Yeah,
even having a difficulty trying to connect it, but I 100% agree. And I definitely feel even more so being an historian, especially on the digital stage, where it's like on Instagram or YouTube, it's a great platform to gain new viewers, but especially now more than ever in the digital world, there's also, which I don't know if you've ever encountered this, or maybe Jackson has maybe talked to you about this, like being on the digital stage as a person of history, you're always going to have people who you are going to have people who disagree with you respectfully, and that is completely fine. But then you also have people who say that they are the authorities on this topic, and I've seen a lot of that on social media, a lot of these history posts with people trying to talk about history. And it's a hit and a miss depending on the person. And that just bothers me a lot because, again, we talked about we've been trained and taught to teach history accurately and respectfully and put it in the context that it deserves. But more than ever on the digital stage, the context kind of gets thrown out the window, or the context gets misinterpreted falsely for that purpose. And I was wondering, that's a little tangent, if you've ever come across that in any of your feeds, any comments of people have left, or even as Jackson even talked with you about, the other side of being an historian on the digital stage.
thankfully, I've not come across this because it is. But then again, like I've said, I'm not putting out historical content for people to consume.
Right.
That wouldn't be the type of comments people would leave on my accounts. However,
Right.
having access to History of Jackson's social media to post things for him, there have been some comments that have come across like that where people do misinterpret context. There was one, and it will forever make me laugh because it's just like, really, are we this um unaware of what's going on in the global world? But cool. We were posting at the Catherine of Aragon Festival, and we'd filmed a video with Jackson outside of Catherine of Aragon's grave, and we were doing a reply video to somebody who had left a comment on another video about Catherine of Aragon. And so we didn't use in that video, we didn't use the word Catherine of Aragon. We just said Catherine is buried here, and this is her tomb, and something about pomegranate being a sign of her house or something like that.
Right.
And somebody left a comment saying, "Oh my God, is Kate Middleton dead? Has she died? Why is she buried at Peterborough Cathedral?" And it was like, no, no, Princess Catherine has not died. She's well and she's alive and she is doing well. Or well, as we now recently with the news about her cancer coming out, she's not doing as well as we would like, of course. But at the time when we posted the video, we were like very much like, no, she's not. She's not dead. She's This is Catherine of Aragon's tomb that we are talking about. But it was just like the context had been completely missed. It's easy to do in a 15-second video on social media. You do lose context, and you also don't have the time to give context either. It's very short, it's very snappy. People's not time, sorry, ability to stay
Yes.
focused for a long time isn't there. So in some situations I'm like, how did you miss the context? In other situations it's like the context was glaringly obvious. How did you miss the context?
Okay, but I would say that at least is like the more comical side, because that's a little funny. But yeah, I can completely agree. Like sometimes the context is like there, sometimes the context is like discussed. I have never had something like that on my videos when I've had historians, but I'm always very mindful of that whenever I have like a guest on the channel, because I always try to present history very accurately and also try to talk about stuff that I don't know nothing about. So I'm always interested in learning, but I always have to be mindful, especially in the day and age with everything that can be taken out of context, especially in
Yeah.
history. It's always mindful. So I always do that with all my guests and looking and screening through. And I hate doing that. But
Yeah.
now more than ever, it's just become second nature. And it's like the business side of me has to look and say, okay, what guest is going to be good on the channel based upon, their interests in history. And even if I've had topics that I've talked about stuff like what was it? Abortion in the 1960s in California. And that was a pretty heavy topic too. And thankfully, no one brought anything up about that, which I was like, thank you. But that
Yeah.
always is like important, and like the business side of being an historian, which now leads into the fun part. Well, depending on your definition of fun, the business side of being an historian. So, Abigail, you said that you and Jackson have been very close for a very, very long time and have begun working together. So, when you graduated from university and you already had your book deal so far, did you initially want to try your hand at being a freelance historian, be it a historical writer for magazines, an editor, or because you have worked with Jackson and because you knew each other, you worked really well, did you reach out to him and saying, I don't know if you have someone working with you, but I would very much like to work with you. So, how did that come about? And sort of, was it either or in the beginning?
I actually don't know how Jackson and I came to work together. In terms of like the most recent development, I'm pretty sure that was probably just a hey, let me know if you need any help. I'm available. Like, just me being like reaching out as a friend saying, hey,
Right.
like I can see that you're doing this work. If you ever need someone to do research for your podcast because you've not had time to read the book, let me know and I'll do anything for you. I'm pretty sure that's how me working with him this year came about. But initially, the way me and Jackson realized that we had a really good working relationship was when he was doing his dissertation, and he had basically, it was on totalitarianism, and he was looking, there's specifically, he wanted me to just read over his diss just because when you're submitting your diss, any second eyes is good eyes to have over that, because
Right.
when you've spent that long looking at it, the mistakes just disappear because you're reading what you want to read, not what's actually in front of you. And so I don't know anything about totalitarianism, so it was a completely fresh perspective. So, but what I do know is Russian language, and I know Russian history. And
Mm-hmm.
he was looking at Stalin in one of his chapters, and there was a moment where a word had been mistranslated, and it's a very common mistranslation, but the word that he had translated, and I've actually forgotten the actual word, but meant father in a religious sense, not in a diminutive this is my dad way.
Ah, okay.
It had been Jackson's translation, or the translation Jackson had found for this word. He had recorded it as it being a fatherly figure, like a dad, diminutive of that. But it actually had the religious connotations, which he hadn't taken into consideration. And that meant that he needed to rework his diss because it actually linked a lot closer to another section in his dissertation that he hadn't previously been able to link because the translation was just
Right.
so slightly just a different, like, linguistic understanding towards it. And I think me and Jackson had a really, really good, I think we were on the phone for like an hour or something, having discussed in depth what this means and how this links to that. And it was through that moment of us actually being like, oh no, we both have we both have a love of history, we both have a passion for this. Okay, actually we actually work really well together in history as well. So I think I don't know, we've all since that moment we've been quite continued. I can't speak English at the moment, sorry, that that left my mind. Yeah, we've had quite a continued amount of presence in each other's life, in terms of the business side. He was the one who really pushed me to take the book deal. He was the one who got me into writing for the Historians magazine. and which gave me the opportunity to be presented with the book deal that I have been given with By Pen and Sword. So yeah, we have a very good working and close working relationship, but the working relationship we have now with the Catherine of Aragon Festival, and just having done Gloucester History Festival and moving towards Chalk in June, I actually don't know how that came about. I actually couldn't tell you. So that kind of just, oh, we're here and that's where we are.
Awesome. And the way you talk about Jackson, having this very close working relationship, which also stems from a deep rooted friendship because you guys grew up with each other since you guys were young. It definitely reminds me of my close friendship and working relationship with my good friend and fellow historian who's been on the channel, Michael Stroud. Michael was my second guest I had on season 2 on my podcast just before I started YouTube a year ago. And he has helped me become a better historian, getting me connected with a lot of other people. With him, I was able to get connections with my friend Courtney, another historian who has his own magazine house, the Hellfighter magazine. If anyone have seen that on LinkedIn, go check them out. And more recently, working with Strategy and Tactics, which is a military magazine publication house, which is the oldest here in the United States. And I have been fortunate enough to work with them now, working now with on few magazines now, which will hopefully be published sometime next year, which is huge because I really want to be a magazine writer, and this is like my huge step forward. And Michael's worked with them for many years, and he always gets talked about. We want you to do this. We want you to do this. With this, what's your timetable? And it's like I can do that, and honestly, I can see the very same thing. Like there's just this very close working relationship that bounces off, good people that we work with. And then it kind of leads now into the audience when it comes to producing historical content, either, of course, on your Instagram feed, Abigail, or History with Jackson on YouTube, or even his Instagram. So when you guys are creating content, do you do it for a general historical enthusiast audience, or do you also try to focus on the hardcore history buffs, the ones who have studied or have some knowledge on whatever topic you guys are writing about, discussing about, creating, and so forth?
So I think with History of Jackson, because that's the social media that I am definitely helping to create more of like like comprehensive social media plan for public history. So I'll speak to that rather than my own, because my own, like I said, is more, like you said, a scrapbook. It is a scrapbook of and a diary of my progress. So it's not
Right.
really any academic purpose or history lovers in general. But the way Jackson and I have sat down and worked out his social media is we want to hit general people who love history as much as we can, but we also want to hit people who have that fundamental understanding of a certain topic and have done research and maybe in the academic community, because and we're trying to strike that balance of like the popular history and the specific history. I think in Jackson's case, he's doing it very well at the moment when he's visiting so many cool sites at the moment. He's been to the Cromwell Museum in Huntingdon, and
Ooh.
which was like some of the content he's going to be putting out from that is really cool. And he's been to Finland. He went to go and did some traveling in Finland, so he's been taking videos and making videos and content around key sites in Finland. So they're really like aimed towards popular history. They're aimed to the masses of trying to, spread a little bit of knowledge about a small topic in a very bite-sized format. But he's also doing some really cool things at the moment where he's also writing a book with pen and sword, and his book is about totalitarianism. Of course, it's his
Yes.
specialty. But what he's doing is he's taking bits of his research or articles that he's finding in the process of his research, and he's kind of talking about them and dissecting them on social media, which I think is really, really interesting, because you are then tapping into those people who have a very good complex understanding of totalitarianism or the other factors around it. He did a really good breakdown of the difference between totalitarianism and authoritarianism. Oh my gosh, that word kills me every time.
Yeah, I know the
Um,
what you're talking about.
and that is as a response to a lot of public um, misconceptions and misunderstanding and kind of conflation of the two words because they mean completely different things. But unless you are an academic and you've got that understanding, you don't tend to notice the nuances between the two things. So I think when we've been putting together Jackson's social media strategy, we have been trying to make sure that we are targeting specific people who have that deep knowledge, but also the public, wider kind of public history aspect of it. Because at the end of the day, Jackson's specialism is totalitarianism. He has a really, really like a good passion for Tudor history and for the Wars of the Roses and like
Yes.
battle like key battles in English history. He has a really cool passion for that, but that's not what the bulk of his work is. So we're trying to utilize his specialism and make it accessible on social media. So we're kind of tapping into his brains and making it accessible. So yeah.
Nice. And now turning over to your book, Abigail. And this question I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on. So, like authors, when we're ever trying to get into a genre that we are passionate to write about, it's always best to read the authors in that genre to see, how they approach the characters, how they approach the story, the world building, and so forth. So, for your book in particular, which is a kind of a mix of, I would say, a reference and a biography, as well as bringing a sense of agency to the character and figure Olga of Kiev. What historians and historical authors have helped you sort of craft your voice as an historical author in terms of like how do you present the sources, how do you tell the story, and how do you word it in a way where it's not too academic, where it's going to confuse the reader, but it's not playing down to the reader and dumbing down the reader's intelligence, but it's almost like that middle ground where even if you're not a hardcore um, medieval historian or Rus historian, you can still pick up the book and understand what it's about.
It's a great question. I found this really difficult because I've never written public history before. I've always written very academic pieces because I've come straight out of uni where all of my papers have had to be extremely like academic. So and also all of the books about the Rus and about Olga in general are very academic books, or they go the complete opposite way and are more like fairy tales, or like really romanticized retellings of her life. And they're the two extremes of what I'm trying to achieve. And so
Right.
it's really difficult to kind of like assess the literature that's available to me and say how am I going to craft my voice, because I like you said, I don't want to alienate people who don't know about the Rus, because it is such, if you don't know about it, you don't know about it. It's not like the Vikings or the Roman Empire where someone and people tend to kind of have like a little bit of understanding because it's in popular culture, it's everywhere.
Right.
um, but I would say that there's a really incredible female historian. Her name's Professor Janina Ramirez, and her book Femina has been really, really instrumental to me, because whenever I do tend to feel like I get lost in that kind of academic jargon and mindset of how I'm writing something, I tend to turn to her book and read how she has written about other women. They're not about Olga, and there's nothing like what like Olga like out there at the moment.
Right.
There is writing about other medieval women though, and Professor Janina Ramirez does write about other medieval women. So it's really good to be able to turn to her work and say, okay, this is how she's handled these quite in-depth sources, these quite complex, quite intricate and nuanced pieces of history, but she still made them accessible. And I'm like very inspired, and I do look up to her work. I had the privilege of meeting her at Gloucester History Festival, and we had such a good
Oh,
conversation
really?
about. Yeah, I was very, very lucky to have met her, and we had a great conversation about Olga, and but also about women in history in general, because women have been written out of history. Unfortunately, it is a universal truth. So
Mm,
it really it was really wonderful to speak to a fellow historian who looks at women specifically and tries to recenter them in history, because it is so hard to read between the lines of these histories of men and find women and be like, no, they were here, they made such an impact, but we need to pull the information and gather it together. And I really, really like the way that she does that within her own work. And it's a style that I don't want to emulate, because um I don't want to be a copy and paste version of her. Like
right.
I have my own voice, which I would like to come to the forefront. But it's really good to read her work as a way to recenter myself and have a way to reference something that isn't as academic as what I am used to writing. So it's finding a balance, because obviously you don't want to copy people, and you don't want to, plagiarize other people's work. Um, but it's really, really good to read her work as an example of kind of how I want to
Right.
present my work. Yeah.
And would you definitely say that regarding your audience and readership, that you have a better understanding now writing this book in this more of like public history format, as opposed to this originally being a paper for academic for university where it had its own audience? Because I'm sure you definitely agree, I'm Abigail, when it comes to writing paper, especially for like upper division history classes, we are taught to write for an audience in mind, that these are people who have learned about this before, they're already masters in their field, and now you're just writing it to see that you yourself are a master in that field, and now transforming that into a book format. Again, you talked about you want to change in a way where you're not alienating people, but you still want to still be academic where people can learn from it. So do you have a good idea of your audience from that transition, or is the audience different?
I do think the audience. Okay, so I think will be two different types of audience in my book. The people who want to read about women in history and they've never heard of Saint Olga of Kiev, and they're like, "Oh, cool, she's someone I've not heard about before. Let me pick this up." They may not be academically minded. They may not be someone who's like, "Oh my gosh, yes, I want to read about the Rus, and this is a cool person in history of her
Right.
I want to read." So I think there's going to be that audience of people, and I cannot wait to interact with those people, because I want to meet every single person who wants to also read about women in history who have kind of been forgotten, because you know there are people out there, and I'm excited. But I also do think there is going to be more of that academic side as well, in terms of maybe not in the same way that, like you've said, when you're writing reports, papers, dissertations, you're not I'm
Right.
not trying to assert myself as a master in this field, because this is a passion for me. But I do think that having the research that I have done for the past 2 years, and taking research from my dissertation and also during my degree, there is my understanding of Olga is so deeply entrenched in that academic world that it would be hard to escape an academic audience as well. So I do think that there is going to be an academic audience, but like you said, I'm not writing to prove a theory or a thesis or something
Right.
like this. So I think my book is going to be a lot more contextual. It's not just going to be because I completely agree with what you're saying. And when I was writing at uni, I'm presuming that my audience, the person who's going to read my work, knows exactly who this is, knows exactly what this means, and I'm not having to explain it. I just take it as fact, and therefore I'm presenting what I'm saying. Whereas in the book, I'm having to take things that I take as fact and explain to people why they are also fact, so that people can kind of come on this journey with me to build up who Olga is. So it's been a really fun kind of endeavor to kind of bridge that gap between academia and public history. And yeah, I do always lean to the academic writing, and then I have to kind of go back and make it not so academic, because even I look at it and go, that's a mouthful to read. No one was going to want to read that.
Definitely, 100%. And now this kind of leads into probably one of the heavy hitter questions on my show that I've recently added. And I'll give context for this. So I had a guest on the show a year ago. Her name was Natalie Wright, author of Season of the Dragon. And when we discussed and I had her on the show, she told me that her book, Season of the Dragon, was her seventh book, not her first. And she dropped a pearl of wisdom, which I've sort of taken and adapted into this question, which I think is really important for any first time author and any first time writer, anyone in general who watches the show, which is the biggest lie you can ever believe about your debut work, no matter what it is: history, writing a book, thesis, presentation, whatever. There's no guarantee that that's going to be the start of your legacy. Now, I also do want to give clarification that there have been some exceptions to the rule. I've had an author on the show, Andy Peliquin, whose debut novel allowed him to skyrocket to award winning status and allowed him to live off of the success to write three more series of books. Yeah. But on the off chance, you do have those that, we rise, then we fall, we rise up, and then we fall hard. And then it's not hitting the audience that we want. And then again, that comes that voice of imposter syndrome, even more so affecting us. And that again goes to what are all our long term goals? Were you trying to make money off of this, or are you doing this because you're passionate about it? Or, as we said in the beginning, do you want to be an historian, or do you want to be known as an historian, which are two different mindsets with two different goals? So, Abigail, in your opinion, with now getting to the question, do you think it's important for any first time historian, first time author, first time historical author to really understand that there is no guarantee that your debut anything is going to be the start of your legacy, but that should not deter you from, writing about it or teaching it or pursuing history if those are indeed your passions?
There's such a profound, again, so many like little like piles of wisdom you're dropping here, because no, you're so right. Like, it would be so unachievable to put yourself on this pedestal of my first work has to be internationally acclaimed, award winning, or as you said, the beginning of your legacy. That's such a it's such an impossible goal to put upon yourself. That's so much pressure. I think as much as I want to say I believe in destiny and fate, because I think that's a little bit whimsical, but I do definitely believe that everything that will happen at the right time.
Yes.
Whether this book skyrockets me, I don't know. I don't really want to be known as a historian. I don't want the fame of it. So if that happened, maybe I don't know how I deal with that, to be honest. But um yeah, if it did skyrocket me into an entire history career off the bat of this book, um I would have to accept that as that's what it is. But I think that just the process of writing books, of building up your academic and public history and your repertoire of work, they're the building blocks that build you as a person, and they're the things that help you build your own legacy. Because it's the work, the time, the dedication that you put into something that that is something something that you can feel so much sense of achievement from doing. So even if this book isn't a wide success, that isn't for me what I'm like measuring the metric of its success from. I'm not measuring it from how many book copies it sells. It's what I believe to be true and something that I'm very proud of putting out. I don't want to put something out that I'm not proud of. And if in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time I've put out another two books and they're the ones that do gain a massive traction, then I know that the only reason I was able to get traction on these books is because of the groundwork I put in my first book through writing about Olga and then into the second and into the third. So yeah, people who do get immense fame and success from their first books, hats off to them because it's a lot of work. But I do think it sometimes is more about the journey than to get to somewhere than the getting there that counts.
Definitely. And this goes back to another thing, another guest I had on the show a few weeks ago who made a comment where he said grit trumps talent. And he perfectly said that I don't care if you're a great writer of prose, great creation with characters, I don't care about any of that. It's the grit, it's the hard work and dedication because grit transforms into talent. That is a transformation because you only get better as time goes on. And if you aren't willing to put in the work to grow, then you shouldn't be in that field. And I think that applies for anyone in general, which it is such a profound thing because it is true. If you see someone, let's say an historian that you really admire, and you want to say, I want to be like them, there are certain challenges that come along with it, especially in the historical field, as we mentioned before. There's no guarantee you're probably going to get into a government job. No guarantee you're going to be in the museum work. No guarantee you're going to be a researcher, a curator, an editor, state historian whatsoever, because those require a lot of experience and a lot of dedication. It's not impossible. It just takes time and a lot of hard work. And if you can say to yourself that you can do that, then you're going to be fine. But if you say that you can't but still want to achieve it, you may want to reevaluate your goals. And I think if you reevaluate that, you'll be fine. And now we lead into the last two questions, well, last three questions of this interview, Abigail. So I'm going to combine the first two together. So you said early in the beginning, in your career as an historian, that Jackson has been A, one of your biggest supporters, and B, a person who has hugely given you a sense of validation as a fellow historian. So with that in mind, are there any other people who have been huge supporters of you on this journey, as well as giving you a sense of validation as a fellow historian?
I don't actually interact with many other historians. Um, in terms of like actual historians, I don't know. So I think I'm through Jackson, I'm starting to meet more people. So I was on a podcast last 2, 3 weeks ago now for the Passion of History podcast and connected with the host Darren and then connecting with yourself through this podcast. Like I feel like I'm starting to build that community of other historians around me who are incredibly supportive, like just in the like the space that I've like known you guys, you like there is there's a this massive support and also kind of like cheerleading. Everyone's like, oh my god, yes, you can do this, like come on, like we're all building each other up. And
Right.
so I think having made the history, like the Abigail Rebecca history Instagram account, has definitely helped me connect with more historians and history lovers who are giving that support. But before that, Jackson was really the only historian that I knew. Obviously, I studied a history degree, so I know people who have studied history, and there are a couple of people who are coming to mind who I did my degree with who also studied Russian language, because they've been absolutely monumental to my ability as a linguist to be able to like pick up the Russian language, because they've supported me like no other. It's their names are Phoebe and Amelia. I lived with them during my degree as well, and we spent a lot of time on our year abroad together in St. Petersburg. And without them, I wouldn't be as confident in my language abilities as I would have been, because they've been the people who've been my cheerleaders from the Russian language side of things. And I think I can't have one without the other, because I'm a Russian historian because I chose to do the not a Russian historian. I'm a historian right now because I chose to do Russian and history at university. But I do think that there are a great many people in my life who have supported me and given me the space to grow and develop as a person, which has allowed me to be a historian and allowed me to grow and have the support to do history. So, yeah, although I until recently didn't have many other historians in my life, there are people in my life who have genuinely given me that space to make mistakes, to change my opinion and question my opinion and interrogate my life views and worldviews in that safety, to then be able to confidently come out as a historian and say, this is what I believe, this is how I believe it happened.
100%. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And I know that exact same feeling. For many people who know what I'm going to be talking about, I was on a fellow historians podcast, which I don't get asked a lot on podcasts myself. So it was really nice change of pace. And that was for fellow historian Luke Daly of the Medievalist. I believe that is YouTube channel. If not, Luke, I am so sorry I butchered your YouTube channel.
Luke is a
But
great guy. I've recently connected with him as well, and he is so supportive. Like, I asked him a couple of questions about sainthood and everything, and he was incredible. Like, the level of detail that he put into his response, I was like, you have just gone above and beyond. Like, you are an insanely talented historian. Like,
yeah, he is. He is. I actually had him on the show. I want to say last month. Yes, it was last month about his book, "Saints and Sinners in the Medieval World," and that was simply incredible. And that was our second interaction. Our first interaction was actually on his channel, where he interviewed me about my book, of Persia, which is my first historical fiction novel, but also my first alternative historical fiction novel, which is Greece under Persian rule after the Second Greco-Persian War. I had to do a lot of research for that, and getting to be able to talk about that and show people my interest, because my background is a classical historian. I truly felt in that moment I knew what I was talking about, because this is a field that I genuinely love. I love all fields of history: medieval history, pre modern, gunpowder, East Asian history, Japanese history. I'm now getting into South Asian history, Indian history, um, and every other type of history that I can find. So I completely understand what you're saying before about now realizing, in the sense, I know what I'm talking about. Like, this is truly where I belong. And this leads into our final question, Abigail, of this interview, and it's a pretty big one. With everything that you've learned, with everything that you've gained from university, from working with Jackson, from writing your book and everything on Jackson's social media channel, as well as working on your own, posting your pictures and telling people where you've gone in the world or in England. What is your word of wisdom to fellow historians who really want to get into this field of study?
don't just choose a period to study because it's popular. Choose a period to study that you find interesting, because there is nothing worse than going. So when I was at uni, there was nothing worse than choosing a module at the beginning of the year because all your friends were doing that module, and then having to sit through that module for the rest of the year and being bored out of your mind, because history is so subjective. There are going to be like I really, really cannot stand military history, and that will piss off so many people because that's what they live, breathe. The war happened, the battle happened, cool. I understand the consequences and let's interrogate the consequences. But I don't care about each military leader's exact moments and movements through that battle. Whereas that
Right.
is someone's, that is everything to some people, and that is so cool. No, some people aren't going to care about the Rus. So cool. Like, but if you don't like what you are studying, you are going to find it dull and you're going to question whether you want to be in that room. So to be passionate about what you are actually studying, I think is the, or looking into or researching or engaging with, in content with, be passionate about it, actually like what you're doing, and not just because other people are doing it, because it's what you want to study and what you want to look at. Because otherwise it's not, you're not even going to produce your best work because you're kind of, your head's elsewhere. So I definitely say it's know yourself and know what you like, and don't rely on other people's opinion on history to form your own.
That is perfectly said, Abigail, 100%. And I think this is a perfect ending to this incredible historians interview. Thank you, all viewers and listeners, for coming to this amazing episode. I want to give a huge thank you to Abigail Rebecca and thanking her for coming on to the show and wishing her the very best in her field as well as her book. I wish her the best with that, and I cannot wait for that to come out. Abigail, thank you so much for coming on the show. And before you leave today, where can people find and engage with you on social media, to reach out, to talk about history? And besides the historical festival coming up in June, are there anything else we should be looking out uh, from you and Jackson in the future?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's been wonderful to connect with you. It's been wonderful to be on the podcast. Your questions have been so deep and insightful, and it's one of those
Thank you.
things where I'm going to be going away and having a deep think about being a historian or being a known historian. It's really sent me through a loop. But in terms of social media, I'm only on Instagram, and it's Abigail Rebecca History with an underscore. Um, I'm sure as you'll be promoting it, you'll be tagging my Instagram. So
Yes.
that's the only social media I have. I do try to just stick to that social media, give updates about the book, a little bit about what's going on in my life, treating it like a scrapbook, a little diary. Um, but yeah, that's the only social media. But yeah, we've got Chalk Jackson, and I will be at Chalk History Festival this June. We'll also be at the autumn weekend of the Gloucester History Festival, which is in September. And we'll also be at a couple of other festivals throughout the year as well. So I would love to see anybody there if anyone is in England and wants to come. But also, yeah, just keep a lookout on social media, because my deadline for my book for the edit for the publisher is this end of this year. So within the next couple of months, early 2025, I should have a date for publication. So yeah, I think that's everything that's coming up for me this year.
Awesome. I'll be linking Abigail's social media down below, as well as I'll also linking Jackson's down below if you just want to see their episodes together. And also, if you want to reach out to Jackson again. And thank you, listeners, for coming to this episode again. I want to give a huge thank you to Abigail for coming on the show. We wish her the best. We cannot wait for her book to come out. And from one historian to another, welcome to the fam.
Oh, that's so cute. Thank you. And also, I can't wait to read your book. That'll be exciting. I'm going to go order it now.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you very much. And with that, listeners, this concludes this amazing interview. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what was your favorite part of the episode. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. And as always, have a nice day.